Welcome. Today we are going to be doing lesson 28, which is dealing with API security. And in this lesson, we learn how to implement 3 security tokens on our API. The first strategy is a simple security token that can be used by all clients, and the second one requires generating a new random token for each user upon creation, and the last one uses JSON web tokens, JWTs, to provide the most secure option for authenticating users to access our API. So if we just go through the listings, the first thing that we do is implement a new verified token middleware in our users controller.js. And if I go to my users controller.js over here, we can see that the first thing we do is create the token variable itself, which is the API token in our query that we put in the URL, and we check whether a token exists as the query parameter. That's the first thing. And if it does exist, we search for a user with the provided API token in our MongoDB database, and then we call next if a user with the API token exists. And if they don't, we just provide this new error message here saying there's an invalid API token, and we pass an error to the error handler. And the next thing that we worked on was adding API tokens, and we created a pre-save hook to generate an API token in user.js, which is in our models. If we go to our user.js here, we have this pre-save hook, and what we do is that we check if the API token provided in the query is the same token that is in the database, and we also create a new unique API token if it doesn't already exist, and we add functionality to make sure that the generated token is unique. It's not the same as any other token that is in the database for another user. And we use the rand token module here to generate a random 16-bit token, which is a 16 string random 16 strings, right? And we put that in our token variable, and then we check if the token is unique, right? With the asynchronous function here to check with an asynchronous query into our database, checking everything in our database to see if that token doesn't already exist. And after that, if it already exists, we just provide an error message here saying the token is already in use, and if for some reason there is a failure there or an error, we just provide this error message here to say there was an error in generating the user token, and we show that error message to the user. And after that, we want to improve the token verification action in our user controller.js, right, which involves adding the error handling and all of that. I already explained that. We check whether it exists in the query parameter, and we search for user with the provided API token, and then we call next if it does exist, and we pass the error handler. I've already explained that. And after that, we're going to be dealing with JSON web tokens, JWTs. And to do that, we have to create a login action for the API in the users controller.js to authenticate the API. So we do that using the authenticate function here in our users controller.js file. And in this authenticate function, what we do is that we authenticate with the passport authenticate method, and then after that we sign the JWT if a user exists with a matching email and password, and we respond back with that JWT. And if we can't authenticate the user, if there's an error, if it fails to generate that excuse me, if it fails to respond with that JWT, we respond with an error message. And those tokens can be used for a certain amount of time that we specify, right? And after that, what we are going to do is we are going to create a verification action for the API in our users controller.js, where we retrieve the JWT from the request headers in the request that we are we send to the server. Then we verify the JWT and decode its payload, which is the data within that JWT itself. We check for the user within that header, and we check the decoded user ID from the JWT payload. Then we call the next middleware function if a user is found with that JWT ID, meaning that that user has been verified, and we respond with an error message if the token cannot be verified, and we just say cannot verify the API token. And then after that, what we are supposed to have when we run our server is something that looks like this. If I already have a user that I created here, I'm just gonna log in as that user. And it's not going to show us when we go to that user's details. We won't see the API token itself. However, if we go to our MongoDB campus, we should be able to see the user's API token within the database. That's going to be checked to see if it is unique and if it's valid. So if I scroll all the way to the bottom, we have the user here, and we have that API token field here, and this is the user's API token field. And this API token is generated every time a user is created. So if I create a new user, I go to user/new, or click that button, and I'm just going to create a user called demo. So as soon as we create the user, we have this message here on our terminal saying the token has been created successfully, and this is the token. And what I can do is actually pass it into our URL here using the API route that we have, and I can go to API/courses, and if I go to API/courses without an API, it says invalid API token. However, if I provide the API token as a parameter in the query, I can just paste that it's the same API token here, and I click enter. It gives us all the users' details, the courses they are signed up for, and whether they are logged in or not. So that is it for lesson 28. I was the driver and Asanda was my navigator. Thank you.